want a particular graphic in your pinwheel block, like this bicycle or this photo of Elvis, or maybe you want stripes that line up. In this video, I'll show you how to make a template so you can add those stripes or special motifs. I'll also share some extra tips for making a pinwheel block. You'll need a photo of the block or the actual block to use as a reference. You can use your ruler to take measurements and then transfer these to the graph paper. But what if I want a bigger block? I draw the size of my block on graph paper. I look back at my reference block or my photo. I see that this line is in the middle and this line is in the middle. Since this block is 6 inches, the middle is 3 inches. So I need to draw a line at 3 inches and another line at 3 inches down. Next, I notice that there's 2 diagonals in this block. I've drawn in the diagonals and I'm ready to make my template. This block has 8 equal triangles, so I'll only need to make one template. I've chosen this triangle to add my 1/4 inch seam allowances all the way around the edges. I don't like the tips on the edge of these triangles, so I went over 1/4 inch and cut them off. I place clear template plastic over my pattern, making sure to line everything up. And then I like to trace those lines using a ruler. I usually start with a pencil so I can erase any mistakes. When I'm sure all my lines are perfect, I use a thin permanent marker to go over those lines. After I cut out my template, I add the name and the size of the block along with the straight of grain arrows. I like to get into the habit of placing the template with the writing side face down on the back of my pressed fabric. I have my fabric on this board that my husband made by gluing this low grit sandpaper on top. The sandpaper helps to grip this fabric and keeps it from moving when I trace around the pattern. So there I have my first tracing. I'll trace 3 more, making sure that each triangle has at least 1 dot of every color. You can use your rotary cutter or your scissors to cut this out, but whichever method you decide, you need to make sure that you cut that marking line off. You'll need to cut 4 more triangles from a different fabric. You should always try to have these arrows on the straight of grain and the cross grain, but sometimes a motif just doesn't work out if it's on the straight of grain and cross grain, and you end up having to turn this in order to get the motif that you want. So this is okay, but you just have to be extra careful when you sew because all of these edges are now on the bias and the fabric has a tendency to stretch a lot when it's on the bias. So I've decided that I want the stripes going in this direction, so all of my edges will be on the bias. I'll need to be extra careful when I sew these edges. I've cut out all my fabric and I've laid out my block. Put right sides together. I want to make sure that everything lines up. I don't like to pin at this point because I find that pins get in the way sometimes. So I just take this over to my sewing machine and I'd sew a 1/4 inch seam. Register your seams by pressing down, open, and then press to the dark. Lay out your block. Use your pattern as a reference guide. Put right sides together. Make sure you nestle these seams to line everything up. Keep track of where you're going to sew. You can pin this line or find a system that works for you. For example, I always hold the side to be sewn with my hand, and I always place that side next to my machine. The side that needs to be sewn is in my hand on this side, and I'm ready to sew. I like to start off with a little scrap. I call that a feet or a leader, and I pick this up. You can use pins if you want to, but I prefer not at this stage, and I just send that in. Here's my next piece that needs to be sewn. I know that this side is the side That's my system. The side to be sewn is always next to my needle. Just double check to make sure these seams are nestled and everything's lined up. After sewing these together, I followed my pressing pattern. I press the seams in opposite directions. So you can see this seam is going that way and this seam is going in this direction. Opposing seams makes it easier when I put right sides together and start lining this up. These seams want to nestle. These seams here, they'll nestle together in these seams. So let me go and get everything nice and straight. At this point, I do like to pin, and I also like to do one last check to make sure that the tips of these points match up with the tips on those points. Looks good. Let me take this over and sew. Here's my completed block. You want to get started on this block, but you don't have any graph paper or template plastic. You can glue cardboard to the back of this pattern, cut it out, and you have a working template. For a free copy of these patterns, please email me at learnquilting@gmail.com. Remember, some printers' settings aren't at 100%, so when you print this out, make sure that this square measures 1 inch or you'll have to adjust your settings. Visit learnhowtoquilt.com for more detailed instructions for making these templates. Click on Beginner Basics, scroll down to Creating a Pattern. Please watch the rest of the videos in this series, a quick method for making pinwheels and what went wrong with my pinwheel block. You might also like how to place your quilt block on point. Please click on like and share our videos with your friends. Thanks.